This video tutorial is compatible with Photoshop CC and Photoshop CS6.
In the foundation project number 3, we take another look at the abilities of Adobe Camera Raw with this landscape image taken directly from the camera. So we'll right click on the image and open it in Camera Raw. And the first thing that we'll do is make sure that we make some adjustments to the shadow and the highlight areas. So we'll make sure our clipping warnings are turned on. Go into our whites and hold down the Alt key or Opt key if you're working on the Macintosh system, and just make sure that our whites and our black clip points are adjusted so we just see the first clipping and then we drag it back until that disappears so that we've got a good spread of tones from white through to black. We can then make some changes to shadows and to highlights using the shadow and highlight controls. So we can rebuild detail and we can pump up or darken the shadows using those two controls. And we can also adjust the brightness and the contrast of our middle values using the exposure and the contrast sliders. The other thing that we can do is increase the clarity, which tends to increase the appearance of sharpness within the image and give us more detail in some of the areas. Some of these changes might increase or decrease the areas that are being clipped, so you do need to keep an eye on what's happening with your blacks and whites at the same time. I'm going to increase vibrance to help with the color and drop down saturation a little bit. So we're pumping up the colors that are pastel-y and dropping down the saturation to reduce the overall strength of the colors. I'm going to leave the color temperature with the As Shot option selected in the white balance drop down menu because I quite like what's going on with the color here. And the next thing that I want to do is just crop the image and straighten it slightly. So we'll grab the straighten tool, drag it across the horizon. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And just drag down the top a little bit and up the bottom a little bit just to make it more of a panoramic type image. That's looking good. Go to our lens corrections and just by default we'll add in the lens correction for this image, and that will reduce some of the barrel distortion that was there in the first place. It's also changed some of our tonal controls because of the reduction in vignetting, so we'll just go back and make sure that we're not clipping any white points. That's all looking good. Now let's go to the graduated filter, and this is the star of the show for this image. I want to add two graduated filters here, and we'll start off by just dropping down the exposure by double clicking the minus button that you can see here. And we'll drag a graduated filter from the top of the screen downwards. I'm going to hold down the shift button to try and get that graduated filter to snap to 90 degrees from the edge of the upper edge of the image. Remember, at any time we can change the amount of exposure, contrast, or any of the other controls that we have here when working with that graduated filter. They're not fixed. None of these controls are actually fixed in this way. Let's add a second one in from the bottom. Again, holding down the shift key. Here it's too dark, so we wish to increase the exposure a little bit, but we might select the other one and just drop that exposure down even more and make it a little bit longer too. Hold down shift again so that we're getting more detail in the sky there. But notice we're losing some detail in these rocks here. So we'll go over to the adjustment brush and get in a bit closer to the image to start off with. And we'll increase the exposure by clicking once on the button on the right hand side of the exposure control. Increase our contrast as well and increase our sharpness and clarity. And we'll just brush over these rocks so that we're getting a sharper, more contrasty set of rocks. So we're applying these changes locally to the image. And you can see we're painting, essentially painting light and clarity back into the rocks. And that's tending to contrast it against the softer look in the rest of the image. Check out the space for the other rocks. Brush through there carefully. That's looking pretty good. Once we've added that detail into the rocks, we might add a new brush, and this time we might increase the saturation, and we'll also increase clarity, and we'll brush that into some of the water around the rocks as well, so that we get some change in color. That's all looking good. Let's add some stylistic texture to the image. So I'll go and select the magnifying tool just to jump out of the adjustment brush mode, and we'll go into the FX panel, make sure we're at 100% and add some grain into the photo. Increase the roughness this time so it's fairly textural, and increase the size so we've got a softness to the grain.